Hello.
Hello.
So I just registered and found myself in this meeting 10 minutes before it's supposed to happen. I don't think you guys meant to do that, right?
No, same thing happened to me about 10 minutes ago. I've just been sitting here
So
doing some other things, waiting for people to join in.
who's in charge here? Is Diane or Crystal? Or
I have no idea. Usually you can't get on
yeah, I
until
know.
the administrator is on.
Yeah, I wanted to tell them what to do here. Anybody there? Hi, Theodora.
Hi, I'm here and
Hi.
I just hopped on myself and here we are,
I
and I'm not
know, I
ready because
know.
I'm running from another meeting. So
I wanted to tell them to make sure they have the waiting room engaged, so that people don't just come in, but there's nobody.
We're already here.
Hi, I'm Diane. I'm here too.
So who started the meeting? Do you know? Crystal?
I think Diane was the first one on.
It wasn't me. This is.
I didn't
Crystal.
start the meeting. I just got on first.
Tomorrow it's 80% when I check down.
Can't take credit for that.
So
well, it's being recorded and hopefully whoever has it recording will clip and edit it.
Well, it's not that. It's just that people are going to start showing up this way with no host here to, you know.
Yeah, that is a problem because then if you are not recognized as the host, you can't mute and have control of the chat.
In fact, guess what? There is nobody hosting.
Really? I'm gonna call Cece because
Yeah,
I
do
thought
that.
that
Yeah.
she was organizing it, and
It may be necessary for us to log off and
No,
log back in.
it isn't, as long as one of them comes along, claims the host, and then does their thing. But what happened was they arranged for this meeting to start without them. It was an option and they didn't know not to do that.
Right.
Which is why we're all starting this meeting without them.
Well, I'm sure you're all wondering why I've called you here this evening.
Oh, interesting.
Recording in progress.
Diane Sheldon, you are on here twice. Oh, there, you just disappeared on the other one.
discussion afterwards. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and resume the recording. Okay, Courtney, if you would like to go ahead and give us your welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Cece, and thank you so much for allowing us to use your Zoom platform here this evening. And thank you, Dr. Kent Chamberlin, for being our presenter. And thank you to Theodora Scarato of Environmental Health Trust, who is here as well. I have prepared a few a 4-minute introduction because, you know, we've learned so much in the last 15 months about cell towers, more than we ever expected to or wanted to. So I wanted to just give a summary and a little bit of a background and why we're here this evening. And then Kent will do his presentation and Theodora will make some comments, Cece will make some comments, and then we've collected a whole bunch of questions from the neighbors and from people who have wanted to learn more about this issue, and then we'll kind of have that discussion between the 3 presenters. So welcome and thank you for being here tonight. My name is Courtney Gilardi. I'm here from Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and this is my daughter, Amelia. We are so grateful you could be here with us on this Monday evening after this long 4th of July weekend. We're especially blessed to be having this informal presentation and dialogue with Dr. Chamberlin, who has dedicated his entire life to studying radio frequency communication and is an expert on this issue. So much so that he was asked to be a part of the New Hampshire Commission on Wireless Radiation and make recommendations. When I heard the Pittsfield Board of Health support the wireless safety bills here in Massachusetts and refer to the New Hampshire Commission report as a roadmap for Pittsfield and for others, I wanted to learn more. I then heard Dr. Chamberlin speak about a proposed cell tower installation in York, Maine, and I immediately sent his resume and details to the Board of Health members, hoping that he could speak to them on this topic. Dr. Chamberlin was kind enough to offer to host a neighborhood listening session to try and answer as many questions as we had on this issue. And I thought, why not open it up to everyone? Citing cell towers and health effects of radio frequency radiation is a big topic. And it's a challenging one for many different reasons, which Dr. Chamberlin and others will discuss tonight. We're starting to see our municipalities, our city councilors, our state representatives learning more and really taking this issue on. And where it begins is education and open dialogue. And we hope to have that this evening. For those of you who don't know the background, Amelia, her little sister, and I are just 3 of the 14 people injured since a Verizon cell tower went up in our neighborhood last year. We didn't receive any notification about the tower being built. It was actually permitted in 2017 by the Zoning Board of Appeals without an abutter map or a butter list, referring to our neighborhood as open space and no one lives there. And because those living here and owning land here were not sent a series of 4 legal notification to all abutters, we never had a chance to attend a permitting meeting, ask our questions, have a voice at the table, or push back on permitting the tower here. They used a deceptive commercial street address, which didn't indicate that the tower would be built on residential 35-foot height restricted land at the top of a populated family neighborhood. And it had a stamp of extension in 2019 when the permit expired. So we had no idea that this tower was in the works, nor did our city councilor, and there wasn't any media around it. So we discovered construction on the first day of the pandemic shutdown and learned that the tower was being built through an illegal access point. Instead of building a 2,000-foot road, they just cut down some trees and said it would be up and on before we could ever learn more about it or even oppose it. We were called collateral damage and people of low education living on land of low value. And we learned that this is not only a public health issue, but it's also a social justice issue as well, because cell towers, along with toxic infrastructure, are often placed in low socioeconomic areas where people of color live, elderly, disabled. But what was worse was that one day my youngest daughter, who had just turned 10, came downstairs complaining she was headachy, dizzy, and buzzy. And when I called Verizon, they confirmed that that was the day that they fired up the tower. Now, my children have experienced headaches, dizziness, nausea, insomnia, skin rashes to the point where they've missed school. They can no longer sleep in their own rooms. And now they've been forced to leave their home and sleep on mattresses on the floor elsewhere at night to help alleviate their symptoms from the constant 24/7 exposure of a class 2B carcinogen, an environmental toxin that they've been forced to endure. By December, we knew that 14 people were experiencing symptoms, with an additional 3 having developed cancer. Neighbors were concerned. They reported insomnia, frequent nighttime waking, palpitations, AFib, ringing in their ears, dizziness, headaches, sensation that their skin is tingling or crawling. And women who had successfully navigated menopause reported unexplained hot flashes, vaginal bleeding, and other hormonal symptoms. Yet if you talk to cell tower companies, they would say they didn't know of anyone harmed by cell tower installations. And what we learned, we were kind of not special. This was happening across the country and across the world, and we were looking for answers. Our doctors shared with us the American Academy of Pediatrics position statement on cell towers, with studies confirming that living near them increased the risk for all these symptoms, including cancer. We learned that the pediatricians had been calling for updates to the FCC non-protective standards since 2012, with no one listening.
Our headaches and nausea and dizziness don't stop on nights and weekends or because it's a special 4th of July weekend. We can't turn off a cell tower or put it on airplane mode when you're feeling sick. We can't live in our home anymore. Our neighbors have moved away because they all have symptoms, and others are looking to buy homes elsewhere. Some neighbors spent all their money sleeping in hotels, and when it ran out, they're now sleeping in their cars away from the tower. Another neighbor has stage 3 glioblastoma brain tumor, which was in remission, and now she is battling cancer again. No one should be forced to live like this. People get sick from cell towers all the time. We are not invisible. We've met so many others harmed by wireless radiation exposure they did not consent to. No one should be forced to move. No one should have to choose between their homes or their health, like our neighbors and I have been forced to do. If we can all learn about the science together, we can make the better choices that protect us and the safe qualities of our homes and residential neighborhoods that we expect.
Now, our Pittsfield Health Department, they hosted a forum on the health effects of cell towers with experts Dr. Carpenter, Dr. Haru, Dr. Havis, and Ms. Symington. And after physicians shared studies of biological harm, the Board of Health members have committed to speaking to Verizon about having the tower removed. Removing a tower from a residential area is much harder than preventing one from being placed near homes to begin with, but it can happen. Tarrytown, Ripon, Cleves are just a few of the communities where towers have been removed successfully and without litigation. We hope that Verizon and Farley White Corporation can be a good neighbor and remove this tower. As we learn about the science, there are so many compelling reasons why. Municipalities and governments have the power to help and the power to choose appropriate placement for cell tower infrastructure away from homes. I want to thank Theodora Scarato, Dr. Kent Chamberlin, and Cecilia Doucette for being here tonight. Dr. Chamberlin will present first, Theodora will make comments, then Cecilia, and then I have questions from our community to ask all of the speakers. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Okay, thank you so much, Courtney and Amelia. It's lovely to see your sweet faces again tonight. Dr. Chamberlain, you now, I believe, have screen sharing privileges if you would like to go ahead and take it from here.
Fantastic, thank you. And thank you, Amelia. That was a very moving thing that you said, because it's something that's true. It's affecting people's lives, and it's something that we need to address. Before I begin formally, let me bring up something for myself here, and that is, I need to say who I am. Yes, before I joined the commission, I was a professor and chair of the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of New Hampshire. And so I'm not somebody who's a Luddite, who's against technology. And in fact, my bias, if anything, would be towards technology. I've been working in technology my entire career. But as I did more and more with the commission, I began to find that, well, what you're hearing from the cell phone companies is not correct, that there are indeed problems associated with being exposed to cell phone radiation. And that's why this conflict of interest statement in the beginning. And that is the people that you hear from the cell phone industry will say that there are absolutely no problems with being exposed. That is their line. It's their playbook, if you will. And in our commission, we heard from 9 experts, including people that you've heard from also, Dr. David Carpenter and Deborah Davis, et cetera. And everybody said that there is a problem, and they went through what the problem was with exposure to cell phone radiation, except for one. And that was the paid representative from the cell phone industry. So I want to let you know that I'm not here. I'm not here because I'm getting paid. I'm here as a fellow citizen. I'd like to have this be informal also. So at the end of this, I want to entertain questions. Also, I want to tell you a little bit about what I plan to present today, because I want to answer your questions. And I'm going to start with answering questions that I've been asked as I've been, talking to groups like yours. So I've talked to a number of groups, and I haven't gotten paid for any of them. And I want to highlight that I'm not a paid person. I'm not being paid to push a particular agenda. So as you hear from others, perhaps people from the cell phone industry who come to speak with you, know that they're being paid. And that makes a huge difference. I'm just trying to give you the honest information that I feel like you should have. And so let me bring up some slides here and go through first of all, some questions. And those are the questions that I've been asked in the past, and that'll maybe make things go a little bit faster later on. So I should be sharing my screen right now, and you should be seeing something that says commonly asked questions. Okay, I'm getting a nod of the head from Cece, so thank you. So the first one I'm going to start off with is, why are we concerned about the placement of cell towers to begin with? I mean, this is an obvious question for you, but not everybody knows the answer. And the answer is there's a large and growing body of information suggesting that, well, there are problems, and there are severe problems. We've known about these problems for a long time, and so has the cell phone industry. So what I say here is that we have evidence that cell phone type radiation causes a problem. What is cell phone type radiation? And the answer is that they are high frequency devices. And these are devices that you're familiar with, you have in your homes, that transmit digital information. Now, this is a little bit different than what happened when I was growing up, because before, what would you say, in maybe the 1990s, you would be exposed to TV towers, to radio towers, and CB radios and things like that. But then after that, we got into digital communication. Now, you don't need to know the distinction between analog and digital, but the types of devices that you're using nowadays are high-speed digital devices, high-frequency devices, and examples of them are cell phones, cell towers, Bluetooth, baby monitors, smart meters, cordless phones, all of the devices that have become popular in the last probably 20 years. And these devices operate at high frequencies, and I'll be going into a little bit more detail there, but and please forgive me if I'm going a little bit quickly. What I'm assuming is that this is kind of background for a lot of you, but if not, please make notes and we can talk about it in detail in the question and answer time. So continuing with commonly asked questions, at least the ones that I have been hearing, what's the difference in the signals between different wireless devices? And I've said that we're concerned about all of them, but they all transmit at high frequencies, and that's roughly 600 megahertz to 5 gigahertz. These are the frequencies, for example, if you're listening to FM radio and they say that they're at 96.7, that means 96.7 megahertz. And if you want to listen to a different station, you tune to a different frequency. And that's how a lot of these devices work. They work on different frequencies. Their 5G is going to be extending the higher frequencies. I said here in the first bullet that it's 600 megahertz to 5 gigahertz. But once you get into 5G, you're going to be dealing with something like 40 gigahertz. Now, I'm not going to talk specifically about 5G right now. What I'd like to do is focus on the types of radiation that you're being exposed to right now. And say merely that at 5G, you're simply going to be getting more radiation, and that's not good. So generally, the devices that you're going to be dealing with, like the cell phones and the cell tower, they use the same signal. And that's a question I've gotten directly. Do cell phones have the same signals, type of signals as cell towers? And the answer is yes. Now, the cell tower is going to be talking, it's going to be on transmitting more of the time because a cell tower is talking to many cell phones, whereas your cell phone is only talking to one cell tower at a time. But they all have the same type of signal, and those signals are of concern. So here are some examples of powers because they do transmit different powers. Bluetooth is up to 100 milliwatts, and by the way, 100 milliwatts is 1/10 watt, and that's significant, a significant amount of power. Smart meters are surprisingly strong, that's about a watt. Your cell phone that's in your pocket perhaps goes from 600 milliwatts, that's 0.6 watts, up to 3 watts. So quite a bit of power. And cell towers can go up to 10 or are 10 watts typically, but they can go up to 50 watts, which is a lot of power. And so it is the power that you could have transmitting near your home. And I just want to underscore this, that radiation from all of those devices are of concern. When you have radiation going on, it's sometimes referred to as electro smog. So if you have one cell phone in your home, it's giving you a certain amount of electro smog. If you have 2 cell phones, you get more smog. If you have a tower near you, that's pumping on 24/7, and that's very much adding to the smog, the electrosmog, the electromagnetic radiation that you're experiencing. So it all adds together, and it needs to be taken into consideration to figure out your total risk. Another question I get involves antennas. What does an antenna do to a cell phone signal? Does it change it? You know, a lot of people are concerned about the antennas themselves, so I think it's important to explain what an antenna does. And basically in short term, so I'm going to give you an antenna lesson, and that is what they do is they focus energy in a particular direction. Let me give you an example here. Let's take a light bulb. I'll put the little filament in there. Oops, sorry about that. And so if you have a single light bulb, it's going to radiate in all directions. And so if you're going to write or show what that pattern, the pattern of light bulb radiation is, just a light bulb, a single light bulb, it would look something like this, like a circle. It radiates equally in all directions. Let's compare that to a flashlight. And by the way, light is electromagnetic energy. So if I were to draw a pattern for a flashlight, what would it look like? I think you can imagine in your head. So let's draw what that radiation would look like. It's going to look something like this. Where if you're standing back here, you're not going to see a very bright signal, not bright light. But if you're standing up here, you might be blinded by that flashlight. So what an antenna does is it focuses the energy, electromagnetic energy, in a particular direction. And it's a good analog to what happens with an antenna because light is electromagnetic energy, and the energy that you're concerned about, cell phone energy, is also electromagnetic energy. So there's a one-for-one comparison between what a flashlight does and what an antenna does. They're both very similar. So if you understand that, you understand all that you need to know about the antennas that are going to be installed in your area. And let's talk about that a moment. So what I'm showing here is an example, is a directional antenna, just like a flashlight, that focuses the energy in a particular direction. And I'm showing 3 of them that are located on a tower. Now, why 3 antennas? Well, they're directional antennas. So this antenna right here, antenna 1, only radiates in this direction right here. Yeah, there'll be some weak signal behind it, but not a lot. Antenna number 2 radiates basically in this direction right here, and antenna number 3 in that direction. So the reason you might want to do this is so that you can have the antennas talking separately to different users. So you now have 3 antennas. It gives you more coverage area than if you were using a single antenna, and allows you to focus the energy, as I mentioned. So in a case like this, putting more antennas on a tower does not mean more radiation for you unless they're from different carriers. And in that case, the radiation would add together. So here's an example. We're taking a top view of 3 antennas, 3 directional antennas, and we're seeing how they can be used to, in this case, talk to more users. Now, the next direction we're going to look at is from elevation. So in this case right here, we're looking at a side view of an antenna, of a directional antenna, and we can see that it's concentrating its radiation in this direction right here. Why would they want to do that? Well, if you had an omnidirectional antenna that would radiate all over, you'd be radiating and sending your signal to places where you don't necessarily want it. So that's why directional antennas, directional in the elevation plane, are used so that you're sending the signal out to the horizon where your users are. That all makes sense. And here's, it makes sense from their perspective and actually from your perspective also. Antennas can be used to minimize radiation where you are. And I'm not going to get into that right now because I want to cover up, I want to get to a certain point, and I'll show you what that is in just a moment, to answer some of the questions that I know are burning with you right now. Before I do, let me show you some patterns from actual antennas. This is the azimuth. Remember, this is the top view of an actual AT&T antenna. It's going to focus the energy in this direction right here. You might put a second, if this were on a tower, you might want to put a second antenna aiming the opposite or the other direction so that you could talk to users on both sides of the tower. And here's what an actual elevation pattern looks like. Nothing amazing, but that focuses the energy in this direction right here. So again, azimuth is what it looks like from the top, and the elevation is what it looks like from the side. So I'll entertain questions later about anything you want to know about antennas. Continuing, other questions are, how does power density from an antenna vary with distance? And the answer is that it varies as 1/r². So as you double the distance, you cut the power in fourth. And let me give you some examples of that. So let's assume that you have someone working on a desk and they have their device. Here's your device right here, and it's 1 meter from them. And let's say that the power density from that device, when it's 1 meter away, is 1 milliwatt per meter squared. I'll talk more about units later, but it's something you might want to become familiar with. And so then let's say that you move your cell phone a little bit closer. So you cut the distance in half. So now it's a 0.5 meter from you. What happens to the power density? It increases by a factor of 4, getting a lot stronger. The next one, what if you put it in your back pocket? Then it becomes extremely high power. And this is why, if you look, and Cece can talk about this, where to find the warning that's in your cell phone, the warning you don't want to wear your cell phone next to your body. And that's because it's putting out power, so much power, that it's going to harm you. So that's written into the warning that in your cell phone, but they never tell you about it, and very few people know about this. So if it comes to doing something like putting it in your bra, ladies, please don't do that. It's not a good idea. But the real takeaway here is that you want to keep this device and any radiating device as far from you as you possibly can. And Cece and others can talk about ways of doing this. Right now, my focus is on the science behind or demonstrating that there is a risk associated with exposure. And that's what I want to get to quickly. So if it seems like I'm hurrying, that's where I'm trying to go. Here are questions that have been posed to me by people living near cell towers. The bottom line, what you want to know is this cell tower going to hurt me? So you can see the questions, and these are in people's words. And one thing in particular I want to address is the New Hampshire report. That's our report from the 5G Commission, recommends that cell antennas, all antennas, and other wireless technology, including 5G, be at least 500 meters from the residence. And I want to show you where that number comes from. So if you're ready, let's go into, actually, bear with me just a second here. Let's go into the next one now. So here is an article that will answer that question. I'd like to take a moment with it. So I've been hurrying, but this is important that you understand what the article says. There are lots of articles like this that back up what is said in this article, but this article says it so clearly, and it also makes it pretty obvious why we would pick 500 meters. So, and I'm going to be showing you a number of articles, and I'm telling you what the article is, the name of the article. I'm telling you some of the results from the article. I'll be showing you a number of them, and then I'll show you how to access it. So what will happen at the end of this presentation, I'll maybe include answers to questions that you can pose, and then I'll put this into a PDF file, and then with help from Courtney and perhaps Cece, we'll make it available to you, and you can click on these links and read the articles for yourself. But here's this, I'm going to put in a nutshell what this article is all about. Forgive my bad drawings. My students have volunteered to get me drawing lessons, but I never took them up on that. Here's a cell tower, and this is a cell tower in Brazil. We haven't done a study like this in the United States, but I wish we would. And then you look at people living in houses that are different distances from that tower. Now, this is all the database in Brazil includes the information about all the people and the location of the cell towers. So they were able to take any individual by individual, figure out where they lived with respect to a cell tower. And were they 100 meters from the cell tower, 200 meters, et cetera, and then figure out their incidence of neoplasm. Now, all of the people in this study had neoplasm, that's some form of cancer. So all of the people in this study had some form of cancer to begin with. And then they tracked those people and found out how many of them died, and were able to plot that death rate as a function of distance from the cell tower. And by the way, this isn't a single study done on a single cell tower. Please note here that this was done with over 800 cell towers. So there's a lot of data here. And this was also, it's worth noting, this is 1996 to 2006. So this covers a 10-year period. And I'm pretty sure that the results I'm about to show you would be more accentuated today than they were back in 2006. So let's look at the data and answer that one of those key questions that I know you want to know. And that is, why did we pick 500 meters? Let's go over this plot and make sure that it makes sense. What we're plotting on the x-axis here is the distance from the cell tower where the person lived. And here on the y-axis is the incidence of death from neoplasm, from some sort of cancer, their cancer rate as a function of that distance. So you'll see, and a couple of things to point out here, and any epidemiologists will love this, and that is you see that the death rate increases monotonically with distance, or actually decreases with distance from the cell tower. So if this were funky data, if these were weird or anomalous results, you wouldn't see this type of behavior. This suggests a dose-dependent mortality based upon the dose, the amount of radiation they're getting from a cell tower. The other thing that's important to note is here is on the blue line right here, that's the mortality for the general population, the rate of mortality for most people, for the average person not living near a cell tower. And so as you can see, as you get farther and farther from the cell tower, the two lines line up or start to asymptote towards each other, which is a strong indicator. Well, it's exactly what you'd expect. You start getting farther and farther from the cell tower, you start having mortality rates the same as the general population. So where did this 500 number come from? This is 500 meters right here. Well, some people who looked at this, and by the way, this is backed up by other sources, by other types of research, suggests that these are valid results. People looked at the plot and they said, well, the break point in the plot is at around 500 meters. Let's pick that as being a safe distance. Is it? Is it somewhat arbitrary? Personally, I'd rather be, way out here, but they picked 500 meters as being a reasonable setback from a cell phone radiation. So let's see how this looks in Pittsfield. So what we have here is the cell tower. You guys know that. I got it off the map that they provided, that the VCOM people provided, and I assume that it's pretty close and pretty accurate to where it's actually located. And then I put a circle at 500 meters from the tower. So you still have an increased rate of cancer, of death by cancer in that area. But I really would be concerned about people living real close to the tower. So I think you can go back and you can see that if you live 500 meters, you can see what the rate of cancers are for people who have cancer. Amanda, you mentioned that that there was somebody in your neighborhood with glioblastoma. That I hate to say it, but just looking at the data, this suggests that there is an increase in possibility that it will get worse because they're near a cell tower. I'm just laying it out as I see it. So I'll keep this up for a moment, but I want to go back and look at something else here. And that is, if you'll note here that, let me clear this off, the largest power density measured during the study was a number that may not mean much to you. I'd like you to just remember that number because I'll be showing it in just a moment. 407.8, that was the highest power density measured during the study. They looked at 800 towers, over 800 towers, and the highest power density they measured was 407, I call it 408 milliwatts per meter squared. And those are the units. And so we see here, that we generally have, this is roughly a 35% increase in mortality rate. And there's not an indication here that this is at the 408 milliwatts per meter squared, but we can assume that it's pretty close to it. So before I move on and say too much right now, I do want to let you people know that you're not alone. That because of data, in fact, maybe go back to this plot because it is so meaningful. A lot of people, when they see the data for the first time, you're not going to see it from the cell phone company. They don't want you to know about it. How else would you see this? I mean, you can think about that for a moment. I'm doing this because I think it's what I should be doing, and I know about it because I served on a commission. There aren't that many people who know about it, and frankly, the telecommunications industry doesn't want you to know about it. So you'd think this would be front page news, but please think about that again. Look at news outlets. Who are some of their major funders for most news outlets? They're getting a lot of money from the telecommunications industry, advertising Verizon or T-Mobile or whatever. So if you're a news outlet or you work for a news outlet, you're a writer for a news outlet, you're probably not likely to come out with an article that says one of our major advertisers is doing something that is harming people. That's what is one of the reasons you haven't heard about it. And also, think about this, I guess the telecommunications industry has something like 500 lobbyists that spread the word about the great things that their product can do. And they make a concerted effort to make sure that you don't know about things like this, because if people did know about it, they'd put up a big stink. And usually they don't know about it until it starts making them sick. And I know that that's where many of you are right now. So I just wanted to say that it's not like I'm anti anything. I'm all for this technology. I'm all for technology as long as it doesn't hurt people. But I see that the people from the telecommunications industry are saying things that I find aren't true. And maybe you found the same thing. Let's move forward and talk about your being alone or not being alone in this. Many communities are becoming aware of what's going on, of the risks posed by the cell towers. And so they're doing something about it, and they're mandating the setbacks. And here are just some of them. Palo Alto, California says if you're near a school, you got to have any radiating device. It's going to be, 1,500 feet back. Why 1,500 feet? It's pretty close to 500 meters. So a lot of municipalities are adopting this 500 meter setback. And I'm providing here, and this will be available to you, the links, so you can click on them and figure out what other municipalities do. And some of them include details about the town ordinances and how they implemented it. So you might want to consider these. You have the one from Stockbridge, Mass. And I think that's a pretty good link right here because it gives you a lot of detail about how they wrote their ordinance. So you're not alone. That's the bottom line right here. This isn't something that is happening just at Pittsfield. You're more aware of it because it's making 14 people very sick. But you can see that other people have had to deal with this issue. So don't feel like you're alone. How do FCC standards compare internationally? So I'll just say in one plot. And notice that we have here is the power flux density. That's the number we looked at before. And then we're looking at how what those results are, or what the limits are for various countries. Now let's go back to that number I asked you to think about. What was it, 408? And let's look at where 408 might fall on this scale. Is it around here? So 408, and let's draw that number up as straight a line as I can draw. Remember, I am challenged when it comes to things like this. You can see that if you're in China, Turkey, Bulgaria, Belgium, that would not be an acceptable exposure to radiation. It would violate the limits. But if in the United States, Japan, Canada, Russia, Israel, no, that's okay. And so you can see here that that there's something in our limits, in our standards, the FCC standards, that allow us to be exposed to radiation that scientifically collected data shows is not acceptable. It's going to cause problems, cause cancer, cause cancers to grow more rapidly. Well, what's going on with other countries? Other countries not only have lower limits, some of them, not all of them, of course. A lot of them just follow the FCC and they say, well, if it's good enough for the United States, it's good enough for us. But there are a lot of other governments who do a lot more than we do. For example, these governments right here, as listed right here, they measure and they publish what those radio frequency radiation, what the limit with the radiation is in various places. We don't do that. In fact, as I understand it, and I've never been correct, I've asked a good number of people, there is no requirement for a cell tower manufacturer or cell tower installer to make measurements after they install it. My background is with the Federal Aviation Administration, and we couldn't do anything. We couldn't make any minor change to an installation without making extensive measurements to show that we achieved the results and that it didn't exceed or that it fell within tolerances. That's not true in the United States. So towers are being put in and they're never being measured. So that's just what's going on at other countries. Now here comes the big one. And when we, because we saw what I've shown you so far, we on the New Hampshire State Commission, and we saw that there were thousands of peer-reviewed publications that document the harm associated with exposure. And I'll be showing you some. Many other countries have lower thresholds. I showed you that. The FCC standards were set in the 1990s. Now, can you remember back to the 1990s? I can pretty easily. And things were quite different from an electromagnetic standpoint. Cell phones, in fact, when did the iPhone come out in 2007? And that's when things really took off in terms of the electromagnetic environment. But before then, and back in the 90s, there was not a lot going on electromagnetically. So things have really changed. The electromagnetic environment has changed, but the FCC rules have not. Another thing that really bothered us is that the FCC, we made requests. As you can imagine, we're a state commission. We have some authority. We made requests of the FCC to come talk with us. And they wouldn't come talk with us. And then we made requests in writing. And they didn't give us valid answers. They sent us to our website, to their website, and their website really didn't contain any good information. So at that point, we said, we've got a problem here. We see clearly that there are risks, significant risks associated with exposure to cell phone radiation, but the FCC is not doing anything about it. And we didn't know exactly where to go from there, but then we read this article. And that is one that I would recommend that you at least read part of. And the title of the report says a lot. This is, by the way, from Harvard University, no less than Harvard. And it says how the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. That really is the bottom line. That's the answer to why your government is not protecting you. But let me read something. I just find it's a very poignant and potent statement, and this is extracted from the report, and it says, industry controls the FCC through a soup to nuts stranglehold that extends from its well-placed campaign spending in Congress through its control of the FCC's congressional oversight committees to its persistent agency lobbying. It is really locked up, the FCC. They're not going to do anything that goes against either cell phones or the furthering of cell towers or 5G, the rollout of 5G. You can read about it here. It goes into detail and it's pretty convincing. And so what do you do then? And so let's move forward. Oh, by the way, what do you do then? Here's something that's going on. And we have Theodora here, Scarato, who may be able to speak to this a little bit more. And that is the FCC is being sued. And I think that there is hope here. And Theodora, you can talk about this later. They're being sued because frankly, they don't have a leg to stand on. They've just arbitrarily said that the standards they're using, although ridiculously high, are acceptable. So they're being sued. One of the promising things I mentioned is one of the judges stated in one of the hearings is that I'm inclined to rule against you. And let's hope that that is the case. And we'll find out a little bit more from Theodora. A ruling on this case is expected within 3 months, but I wouldn't hold my breath. It wouldn't say, okay, some people are taking care of this. I don't need to do anything. I do encourage you to continue being as proactive as possible on this. Continuing on, what I want to show you now are just some peer-reviewed publications that we used in the New Hampshire Commission to come to our conclusions. And the reason I feel it's important to show these to you is because the cell phone industry, the representatives from the cell phone industry, claim that all of these publications, all of them are bunk. And so I want to show you, and I guess I feel like it's my responsibility to show and convince you that they are not bunk. So I will be showing you examples of journal articles documenting the negative health effects. And so like I say, the cell phone people will tell you that they're from fringe publications. No mainstream publications are finding any problems. Well, indeed they are. And they've been reviewed by experts in their field. As a department chair and as I'm a former associate editor for IEEE transactions on antennas and propagation. If you're not in the field, that may not mean much to you, but I have been an associate editor myself for a scientific publication. And so one thing I do know how to do is identify what's junk science. And also as a department chair, when a faculty member comes, a prospective faculty member, I need to look through their dossier and their CV and find out if their publications have value. And I do that by judging the quality of the journal in which they're publishing. So this is documented right here. What I'm going to show you coming up are some articles that document problems with cell phone radiation. And that was one of the roles that I played in the New Hampshire Commission, was to look at the journals and validate them and say that they're, look at their value. And I'll be talking about that a little bit as I go through these articles. I'm trying to go quickly because I know your time is valuable, but I have a lot to say. So forgive me if I'm going too quickly, but I feel like the information is important. So what I'm going to give a number of articles right here, not too many. I could give thousands. We could spend the rest of the day doing this and into tomorrow. So what I'm going to do is give you the title of the article. I'm going to show you where it came from, provide you a link so that you can go to that article yourself, give you a relevant quote from the article, and then I give what's called the impact factor for that journal. The impact factor is important because it tells how many people cited that journal. The average for all journals, the average impact factor is less than 1. And I'll show you the impact factor for all of the quotes that I'm about to give in the next few slides. And what it says is low intensity microwave radiation, such as what you get from your cell phone, induces oxidative stress. You'll hear about that. That's something about the free radicals. Oxidative stress creates free radicals, creates inflammation, and it does damage to DNA in rat brains. Well, sometimes the cell phone people look at something like this and they say, hey, you can't look at something that was done on rats and equate it to what happens with people. But let me ask you, how many people would want to volunteer for the study to have your brain exposed and then have it be evaluated? So no, we have to work on it with animals. The next one is exposure to non-ionizing electromagnetic fields emitted from phones does damage to the human ear. And again, not going into great detail here, but just to say that we have enough problems with hearing, particularly as we get older. We certainly don't want to have our cell phones damaging our ears, the hair follicles in our ears. So maybe that's not too important to some people, but it's certainly important to me. Here's how you can get access to the article. Notice this is one of the lower impact articles that I'm going to be showing you with an impact factor of 1.8. Let's keep on moving. The exposure to GSM alters gene expression, proliferation, and morphology of skin fibroblasts. And the reason this is potentially important is skin fibroblasts are important, as you can imagine. They're helpful in creating collagen and building more skin, and you don't want to have those be affected. And the reason I feel like this is particularly important if you're thinking about 5G is one of the claims about 5G is because at higher frequencies, the signal does not penetrate as far into your body. Well, your skin is the first line of defense for your body. It's your largest organ, and you don't want to have something that's going to be affecting the fibroblasts in the skin. Moving on, and this is an important one because it deals with some of the issues that the 14 individuals who experienced problems in Pittsfield experienced. So you might want to read this article. And it creates things like sleep disturbance, insomnia, headache, depression, fatigue, tiredness. That's the, I shouldn't be reading so quickly. Concentration dysfunction. In fact, it has association with ADHD. All of these things right here. And it's documented scientifically. They've done studies. And what you're experiencing is not whoever would have thought that happened? No, a lot of people thought that happened, and it's documented right here. So you can look at that article, and this is from a reasonably high impact journal article. Moving along, this is something involving radiation and male fertility. You perhaps have heard about the decline in male sperm count and motility. It has to do, it seems to track pretty well with exposure to electromagnetic fields. And where do men, young men in particular, carry their cell phones? In their pockets, right near where the sperm is generated. So this has been documented, and it happens in animals, and it happens in humans as well. So just another example of a problem. This is from a good impact journal. And so I'm not showing you anything that's fringe science. Moving along. In this case, we're looking at, the effect on the blood. In fact, the exposure can cause blood clumping. So you take somebody, their blood looks fine, you expose them to electromagnetic fields. And I know people who've done this. And all of a sudden, the blood does what you call a rouleau, where the blood clumps together and it makes it harder for the blood to circulate. Well documented, you can read about it here. This is one that actually got our attention. I don't know, it really got our attention. It's a high impact journal right here. You can see it here. And what it says is that if you have a cell tower in the presence of trees, the trees are degraded, and the degradation starts on the inside of the tree and then spreads around to the entire tree, and then that degradation spreads into the area. That's a concern. It's an environmental concern. In fact, one thing that we were thinking about in the commission is maybe since the existing laws prevent us from using health as an excuse to deny sighting. If you haven't heard about that, we can talk more about that later. Actually, have people much more qualified than I am available to talk about that. But because we can't use health as a concern, maybe we can use environment. That's something we're thinking about. The next one is that it affects insects too. So you can check this out if you'd like. But yes, we know that pesticides impact insects, you kill them. But it turns out that as you have exposure, radiation exposure, in addition to insecticides, it really exacerbates the problem and accelerates the death in insects, particularly the ones that we want to keep. So what I've done right here is I've rushed you through some articles. I haven't gone into, I hope, excruciating detail. I can go into a lot greater detail if you'd like. But like to move forward and talk about another question that I get a lot, and that is, aren't you just cherry picking? Do all published studies show the harm from cell phone radiation? So we are accused sometimes of cherry picking because, yes, I just showed you, and I wasn't going to show you a result that showed no effect. I showed you results that do show an effect, showed you journal publications. But I want to answer this question because it's something that you will probably hear if you tell the cell phone people about this presentation. They'll say, there are conflicting results and they don't all show a problem. And indeed, they're correct. And let's look at who does show harm. So some journal articles do show harm, like the ones I just showed you. Others do not. And it's somewhat dependent on who funds the research. Well, let's talk about that. Let's go back to 2010. Look at a New York Times article. It's all linked right here if you want to read the whole thing. A university professor, Harry Lai from Washington State, University of Washington, he analyzed 326 studies, and he found that only 28% of industry studies showed a problem, whereas those that were not funded by university, who were not funded by industry, 66% showed a problem. Okay, science isn't perfect. There's something called conformational bias. It comes into play in research. We all do. We all suffer from conformational bias. We tend to remember the things that supported our beliefs and forget the things that don't. But this is a pretty extreme case. But this is back in 2010. Now, what typically happens in studies like this, and if you want to go back, for you like history, look at what happened with smoking and look at the evolution of smoking studies. They started off very much like this. They contradicted each other. They weren't. Not all studies showed a problem with smoking. And this is something we pretty much accept as really bad for you right now. But remember that only 5 out of 6 people who smoke get lung cancer. Well, that's contradictory right there. And for every individual who dies, or every long-term smoker who dies at a ripe old age, that's a contradiction also. So yes, they do exist. And also they are very much affected by conformational bias. But what tends to happen, as happened with smoking, trans fat and sugar and asbestos and almost every other thing like this, where industry says initially, no, there's no problem, eventually the facts come into clearer focus. So let's flash forward to the next study and let's go back to 2020 and let's see how things have changed. Now, all of a sudden, we're seeing that 73% of studies now show the harm from RF radiation. And these are neurological effects. Next one is genetic effects. And in that case, it's up to 65%. And finally, we look at free radical generation, and that's one of the strongest ones, I think, one of the most important ones to know about, where over 90% of the studies now do show a problem with exposure to radiation. And that's all studies, regardless of who funds it. So as you go over time, the real problem comes into focus, and that's what's happening right here. So yeah, not all studies agree that there's a problem, but most of them do. And in the early studies, the ones they refer to, it was because industry were funding the studies. And I actually won't say too much about that right now, but you can fund studies in such a way that you'll get the results you want. So moving right along, the conclusions that were reached by the commission majority, and again, I'm talking about the New Hampshire State Commission, cell phone radiation, including 5G, poses a significant threat to humanity, to human health and the environment. No surprise there, based on what I've shown you. Because what I've really done is I've taken you through a quick sequence, chronology of what we discovered in the commission. The relative risk is not clear. And this is important because without knowing what that relative risk is, a cost-benefit analysis can't be performed. Let me give you an analogy that we used in the commission, and that is, as you drive your car, you know that there's a risk. And what is that risk? Well, it's around 35,000 deaths per year, and a lot more people are injured on the highways. We know the risk. It's a number. It's a number that we can readily define. And what's the benefit? Well, clearly, we agree that the benefit is worth it because most of us still drive. So in that case, there's a cost-benefit analysis. It's very clear. And what people can do is make their decision about how they want to deal with it. And how they can lower their risk by the car they drive, by how they drive, by how they maintain their car, and whether or not they use their seatbelts. So in that case, there's a cost benefit analysis and they can make the decision. And that's what's one thing that we felt very strongly about in the commission. And that is people should be able to decide what risk they want to expose themselves and their family to. And in the case of cell phones, you can decide not to have a cell phone or you can keep it in the airplane mode, but towers are placed there, they irradiate you 24/7. And unless you can move away, there's nothing you can do about it. And the way the laws are written right now, you can't oppose that, the siting of a tower near your home, and because of health effects. We also came to the conclusion, as I mentioned earlier, this is not a scientific issue, it is a political one. Until the FCC regulations are changed, there's not much you can do about it. And that goes back to the 1996 Telecommunications Act, Section 704. You can't use health as a reason to deny siting. So there are our recommendations. Again, nothing surprising here is we want to seek, and so we're writing the legislation, we're working on writing that legislation now, to seek an independent evaluation of FCC radiation guidelines. The panels that they have convened in the past to decide what the guidelines are comprised, from what we can tell, of industry representatives. So they're not going to change it unless they have something that's independent. You bring universities in, you bring in people like me who can make an independent evaluation and then come up with more realistic guidelines. So what we want to do is work with our federal representatives in Washington to make that happen. Also want to take action to alert the public. I mean, that's one reason I'm here tonight. We want to let people know, and we are hopeful that we can get more information out to the public and to the schools to prevent people from experiencing this degree of radiation as they are now. We want to encourage the migration to wired networking. We know you can do it. We did it before, and we can go back to it. And Cece Doucette is a great resource to find out how to do that. Maybe you can, and there's a website that you can go to that tells how to do that. And then perform radiation level measurements or radiation measurements at cell towers. So that's something that we're recommending, is that, okay, we need to mandate that these measurements be taken. I guess a group went around and they made measurements at towers. They did this independent of the cell tower people. So it was done informally. And they found that many of the towers, many of the sites exceeded the FCC regulations, which what you probably realize right now, that if you exceed FCC regulations, you're really putting out a lot of power. And also we want to enable the public to perform their own measurements. We know that we have these meters. They're not that expensive. This one's about $150. It works great. Cece can talk about that also, but we're trying to make them available to people in general so they can make measurements for the fields around their house and also provide them with the context of what it means when they get a particular reading. And finally, we want people to, we want to work to protect the trees. As I mentioned, there's an environmental aspect to this that needs to be addressed because we are harming insects, we are harming the vegetation in the vicinity of towers, and so that's a precious resource. We should be doing something about that. So now I have some references. These will be at the end, and as I mentioned, I'm probably going to include some more before I wrap this up into a PDF and send it out. But that does conclude my presentation. I tried to be as fast and succinct as possible. And I hope that I answered some of your questions at least. And now I'm going to turn it back to Courtney and Cece to moderate a discussion.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Dr. Chamberlin. That is such valuable information, and we really appreciate you putting it in a framework that most of us can follow and understand. Theodora, did you want to take a few minutes and speak before we open it up for discussion?
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here, and thank you so much. That was excellent. We have a landmark case against the Federal Communications Commission, and as was just described, our FCC limits are from 1996. Courtney, you talked about the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the American Academy of Pediatrics, our nation's largest group of pediatricians, wrote to the FCC back several years ago when they opened up their their question of, should we change our 1996 limits? And they asked for updated limits that considered children, that looked at long-term exposure, that looked at impacts to the developing brain, because the limits we have, and this was what got me on this road, was when I learned that the limits we have were developed so long ago and didn't even consider long-term exposures or research that looked at impacts, neurological impacts. So the AAP wrote letters to our federal government asking for them to update the limits. And many organizations did. There were thousands of documents online in the FCC database talking about what your community is going through, talking about cancer, all kinds of biological impacts to people, impacts to wildlife. The other thing I wanted to mention for people on the call is that there is no health and science agency, no environmental agency that has ever looked at the full body of science on this for decades. And there's actually no agency that is in charge of impacts from cell tower radiation. So it's not, if there simply isn't any group of expert public health scientists, environmentalists looking at this issue in the federal government, making sure that the limits we have are safe. It is a complete gap in accountability. It is, it blew my mind, and it got me down this rabbit hole and working on this many years ago. So there's a letter from the EPA, which I'll put in the chat after I speak, from 2002, confirming that from the EPA. And the EPA, by the way, was cited in a couple press pieces that went out saying we need to update these limits. And then they got fully defunded. So I will put that information into the chat. There's a letter that they wrote to me, which is in the New Hampshire State Commission excellent report, which if you read that, and the Harvard report, you got it down. There you go. You can just get everything you need to know in there, where they confirm that there's been no look into this by the EPA since 1984, actually. And they wrote that to me in a letter. The one other thing I wanted to mention about our website, our lawsuit, and we are awaiting a decision, and it could be 3 months, or we don't really know. We hope it's imminent, but there have been times where it's taken quite a long time. That in that case, there is an amicus of NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and that's signed onto by elected officials from Hawaii to Michigan to California to Massachusetts to Maryland. And when you look at the need for an environmental review, it is important to know that in the law that refers also to human health. So it is about all people, everything that is, in our environment, because that has not been done with the new rollout. So you can go to I'm from Environmental Health Trust. I'm executive director. We have information at ehtrust.org as well. And thank you so much. I'm glad to answer any questions about the lawsuit that come up and our actions at the federal level. We would like so that your community of Pittsfield is not in this situation, for there to be limits that are developed by the federal government, by experts, independent experts, that protect against cancer, headaches, oxidative stress, all of the biological effects, and that truly protect people. And right now we do not have that. So when those levels are put forward that were measured in Pittsfield, to measure them against FCC limits is absolutely irrelevant to safety. It's irrelevant to the symptoms that have been reporting. They are simply irrelevant to health in general, because they weren't even set based on that at all. Not even to protect against cancer, by the way. They were based on burns and overheating. And those limits, as Dr. Chamberlin said, the groups that that helped to create those limits. There were 3 groups, and one of them was headed by the chief scientist of Motorola, who continues to this day to put forward information. So we have captured government agencies and industry, captured authorities, which are putting forward what is safe and what is not. I would also recommend looking at what Investigate Europe put out. They have a several part series on 5G, but one of them is about what level is safe. And they talk about the industry involvement in all of the transnational agencies that are working on this. And thank you so much, Cece. I could talk forever, and I'm going to stop now.
Well, Theodora, we could listen forever because you are one of the people who have worked, I would say one of the people who have worked the hardest on this in the last 10 years. And I know that you stand on the shoulders of giants as well, who have been working on this for 30 years. I was in touch with Blake Levitt today, 35 years, and she's still working on this. So this is not a sprint. It is a marathon, but because of the hard work that so many have done to this point in time, others are joining this conversation at a really good point in time because we do have the lawsuits. We do have terrific resources available. I have just opened up the chat, so folks are welcome to put their questions in there. It's not going to be a chit chat back and forth. What we'll do is we'll take your questions and see if we can have our experts answer those. And so while those come in, I want to do a screen share and just show folks where we have some really good resources. So can everybody see this? Okay, somebody give me a nod. Courtney, do you see my, okay, Kent, thank you. So I wanted to share the really good news that Courtney spoke to the Pittsfield Public Library and asked if they would please put a radio frequency radiation detection meter on loan in your public library in Pittsfield. And your librarians were fantastic. And they now have one in circulation in Pittsfield. So anybody with a library card in Pittsfield can go down to the library and take this device out. It's called the Safe and Sound Pro Meter. And this device is about a $400 device. And when I turn it on, if I had a cell tower outside of my home, this would be blinking red off the charts. I am very fortunate, and I realize how fortunate I am that I don't have a cell tower outside of my home. I do have neighbors who are using Wi-Fi. I do have a couple of smart meters hooked on the other side of my house, which we hope to remediate soon as the regulations change with our Public Utilities Commission. And we have a bill in Massachusetts to try and get the right to say no thank you to those utility smart meters because they pulse 24/7. And then here in my house, I have hardwired, and that is not really hard to do. We all kind of were hardwired when we started using digital technology. That just means get your Ethernet cables back, plug them into the back of your router. And if the devices that you want to connect to the Ethernet no longer have an Ethernet jack in them, for most devices, you can simply get a little adapter for $20 or $30. So for your personal devices, this is not a big deal. You can get them for iPhones, for iPads, for Chromebooks. But again, as Kent said, the public has no idea because the industry has been that successful at deploying the Big Tobacco Playbook. So because I have chosen to hardwire my house, and on a good day, my family has all their devices in airplane mode when we're inside the house. We still use a lot of reminders. But this is what the radiation looks like in my house. You see that it's flashing green. Flashing green is about as good as you can get to create a sleep sanctuary. And we want to protect our sleep above all else, because that is when your body does its cell repair and regeneration, and when a child's DNA is forming. So this is what my house looks like, because I've gone through just learning and choosing, giving myself the right to choose to have safe technology. So right now in my house, the maximum reading I'm getting is 3.24, right? So that's here in the slight concern level, microwatts per square meter, and that's what this meter measures. I will tell you that when I went into Boston with a woman who lives there into the North End, we were getting readings 300,000 microwatts per square meter. Now, Courtney is showing us hers right now. Courtney, can you unmute and tell us what reading you're getting?
Let's see. I wanted to show you.
Oh, you're in the red.
This is, we have been taking readings from the very beginning. And so I don't know if you can focus in on what these readings are.
Yeah.
So we have peaks of 1,110, max 1,240, and an average of 62 on My Safe and Sound. That was taken this morning around 7:30. So we saw the VCOM car drive through our neighborhood, I think June 10th, around 7 o'clock to 7:45 with their antenna out the window, driving along the street. And I know based on the direction of those antennas that on the street, the readings are different, you know, in my front yard. Mm-hmm. And we can take those readings, and we've taken them in the girls' room. We've taken them outside the house. Those are the ones that I took this morning. And we often put those videos on at Pittsfield Cell on the Facebook page. So people can see that over time, before the tower, we had these clean green readings, Cece, as you have in your home. And now we have these high to extreme readings, and we have everything hardwired. So for example, you know, we've got the Ethernet connections. We actually powered off the house, and we did a 24-hour read with the CoreNet, which you can, you know, like plug in and actually track reads. So we can see that the levels here that we're experiencing are different than the levels that, you know, when we sleep away from the house where the girls don't have symptoms, we have those clean green blinking reads. And we never thought that this was an issue before, right? Like we filter our water, we've got even an air purifier because we get pollen from the pine trees, but we never thought about electro smog as being a source of a public health concern that we needed to protect ourselves, you know, around. And so we feel really privileged that we have the opportunity to sleep away from our home. But the girls every morning, they ask, can we go back home now? You know, they just, and maybe you can talk about, you know, we know that the tower was tested. We know that the levels are under FCC. Can you talk about the building biologists and the biobiologists and the other levels that scientifically and health-wise we measure against?
Yes, and so what I will do is I will do my screen share again, and I will go out to the internet. Let me see. Let me get rid of that and see. Hang on, it's popping me around. Let me come back to it for a second. What I would like to show you is the bioinitiative report. Here we go. So I've pulled up the bioinitiative report right here. So this is what the bioinitiative report website looks like. This is where you will find a compendium of the science, okay? So they've done something as a courtesy to the public, and they've taken a lot, like thousands of studies, and they've broken it down by symptom and by how much radiation is causing these symptoms. So when you go through the bioinitiative color reports, down here is the key that breaks it into stress proteins and disruption to the immune system, infertility and reproduction effects. We have oxidative damage, DNA damage. We have disrupted calcium metabolism. We have brain tumors and blood-brain barrier compromises, sleep, neuronal firing rates, memory loss, learning, behavior issues, and more, cancers, and cardiac effects. So I wanted to show you this website to show everybody that this information is all right there. It's not hard to access. It's free and it's online, and these scientists from all over the world worked really hard to pull this together so you the public, and you are public servants, and you, the media, can get at the facts and cut through the industry spin. So that's one that I wanted to share with you. Another one that and again, if you go and get that meter from your library, you can go out to Safe Living Technologies, which produces that meter, and you can go onto their website where it says, what is EMFs? And you can look at these exposure limits, and they have these wonderful documents here that make it easy for you to find what these numbers mean. So it's all right here for everybody. Another resource I wanted to share is that I think when Theodora and I first started learning about this, there was a huge gap because so many people were getting sick, and our doctors had no idea that they should even be screening for microwave sicknesses or electromagnetic illnesses. So now today, literally today, every single one of you on this call might reach out, go through your patient portal and tell your doctors, tell your nurses, take this down to your firefighters because they have to get continuing education credits too, and say, have you been trained to recognize microwave sicknesses? If they have not, ask them to please complete this training. They will hear from world-leading doctors, scientists, public health experts, and actually Theodora and I both were on a panel to talk about what's happening in society with this, with public policy at the state, local, and international level. So all of our doctors can be trained on this. There's already something called an IDC code, which is an international diagnostic code. So they can put it in their insurance systems. So, but they would never even know this is here, just like the public doesn't know this is here. And if you don't need to get continuing medical education credits, folks off the street can pay a very small fee to have access to this conference and just sit down and learn. The lectures are all a half an hour, maybe an hour, so you can digest it at your own pace online. So that's a terrific resource for everybody. And then what I also wanted to show is that as we've learned, Courtney and everybody in Pittsfield, you are not alone. Americans for Responsible Technology, led by Patty and Doug Wood, have put together an incredible website, and they are gathering up groups all over the United States. In most of the states, look at California, how far ahead of this they are. Here in Massachusetts, we've already got almost a half a dozen groups who are working on this. So look for people in your areas and join together, because it is the public speaking up that impacts policy, that impacts these lawsuits. And then the other thing that Americans for Responsibility or Responsible Technology has done, and done so well, is every time something good happens, they take the best practices and they translate that into something that others can use. So if you look at their toolkit, here's information to quickly come up to speed. Here's how to reach out to your neighbors and start this conversation. If you're worried about real estate, because we see in the real estate literature that property values drop if there's a cell tower nearby. But they've taken best practices on zoning bylaws, municipal codes and ordinances. So you can take this document to your town and to your town lawyer, because by and large, your town lawyer has no idea what's going on unless they are a telecom expert. And thankfully, there are lawyers who are telecom experts. And Courtney, I know you had Andrew Campanelli call into one of your Pittsfield meetings, and he will tell you there are 20 things you can do to strengthen your town bylaws. Even if legally you can't deny an application due to environmental or health effects, you can certainly talk about it. The industry will tell you you can't, but you can talk about it. You can't just deny it on those grounds. But there are many other things you can do as a community to strengthen your bylaws and put up barriers so they can't just blow into town and throw these things up without having to jump through some hoops to do it. And they want the path of least resistance. So the stronger each one of our towns can make our bylaws, the better. Now, our towns don't consider themselves experts in this. They just want to point to higher ups and say, well, they said, you know, we can't do anything. And that's what they've been told by industry, which is not true. And I can see Dr. Chamberlin nodding his head. So the only way that this wheel turns is if you and I and everybody on this call finds the courage to go sit down with your town, get on the agendas, go to public comments, and start sharing these really incredible resources. Because without us doing our part, nothing changes. So those are some of the resources I wanted to share with you tonight. And also I wanted to point out that the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act, and I might be saying those a little bit wrong, but Theodora is a whiz on all of this stuff. Some of these things can be used in court to stop the industry from doing what it's doing. Our federal government in some agencies already recognizes that we are up a creek without a paddle here. So we do have some protections in place, but we need to become educated on that. And maybe we can do another forum another time. So those types of resources, this is my personal research repository, and anybody's welcome to go out to Understanding EMFs, but you can scroll down and find some of those ADA protections if you want to look into that further. So, and thank you to Libby Kelly and others who years ago worked with our ADA for those sorts of accommodations. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I will pop over to the questions that have been coming in. Courtney, would you like me to moderate the questions?
I've got some here that people sent in earlier today
Okay,
from
go
the
ahead.
neighbors, and I wanted to prioritize those because we've been waiting for such a long time to get some of these questions answered. So one of the first ones, especially when you have a meter, people say that, if you have a microwave or maybe, a home full of people with devices, then you must consent to having a cell tower outside your house because some of those readings are pretty high. What would you, Dr. Chamberlin, say in response to somebody saying because you have a microwave or maybe you own a cell phone, that it's okay to be exposed 24/7 to a cell tower?
Wow, that's interesting perspective. Yeah, I equate this to smoking. You have a smoker in the house, you have a degree of smog and it's pollution that will impact everybody in that household. You bring in somebody else, they're smoking too. Maybe they're fairly light smokers, a pack a day or half a pack a day. Still, the more people you bring in, the more smog you have in your household. Now, let's consider inviting Uncle Harold here, and he's a chain smoker. He's smoking 24 hours a day. The pollution really increases. So the analogy is that the light smokers, are maybe your devices in a household. But the cell tower is Uncle Harold, who is on 24/7. And so it adds hugely to the total smog load in your house. So no, there's no comparison. It's not, you can't say that, oh, because you have devices in your house, it doesn't matter if you bring in a cell tower. It matters a lot.
Thank you for that. My next question is that we have 6 antennas on this cell tower here at 877 South Street, but the permit is for co-location, so they can add 48 towers altogether. What happens to the RF EMF levels with the addition of, say, 12 antennas, 24 or 42 of them?
As I mentioned on that one slide, it might not make a difference if those antennas are placed on the tower so they can reach different segments of the population. However, if you have different carriers and they're pointing in the same direction, your direction, then it's going to increase your exposure by that amount. In other words, if you have one antenna, you get a certain amount of exposure. You put on a second antenna aiming in your direction, perhaps from another carrier, it doubles your radiation exposure.
Okay, and I think that's what's happened here is that in 2019, what they said was, we want to make sure that towers can have the base strength to co-locate 4 carriers. So it's like instead of having additional infrastructure everywhere, we just put one infrastructure somewhere and then we can continue to go up. So our tower right now is 115 feet. It can go up to 150 with 4 carriers. So if I hear you correctly, with 4 different carriers, that could then increase the power output of the tower?
Well, this does get a little bit complicated, and
Okay.
this is a place where the FCC is capable of doing the right thing, and that is they will look at your exposure, your total exposure from those 4 carriers, and then adjust the power so that it doesn't, the total load doesn't exceed their limits. But their limits are so woefully high to begin with. So yes, they can account for the fact that you have 4 carriers and make adjustments that will bring you to that limit, just to make sure that you don't exceed that limit. But yeah, it's going to push everything up. The more carriers you have, the more exposure.
Do you know when the FCC limits were set in 1996 based on that 84 science? We understand that the thermal effects that they were taking into consideration was from a 6-minute cell phone conversation. How long was the full body exposure from a cell tower that they took into consideration?
As I understand it, for some of the National Toxicology Program study, they did have rats exposed. It was 24/7. It was to simulate full-time exposure. But in terms of human exposure, we really don't know much about it, and certainly not in the long term. And that's something that concerns me greatly. Taking smoking as an example, I could smoke for a week, a couple of weeks, and there wouldn't be any noticeable difference in my health, probably. But let somebody smoke for decades, and that's when the problems are going to arise. And that's kind of my question is, or my answer is, we don't know what happens with this long-term exposure. It only started, this long-term exposure, perhaps 10 years ago. And we don't know what the outcomes are. The latency in many cancers, that is how long it takes between when you're exposed to a carcinogen and when you exhibit the cancerous response, you get cancer, in other words, that can be 10 or 20 years. So it could be, from all that we know, and for all that we know, that we could see an epidemic of cancers in 10, 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know. And that's why we are in the commission felt that we should be, cautious, use the precautionary principle. When you don't know the health effects, and there are a lot of things indicating that there are negative health effects, you slow down. You don't just charge forward and put in more cell towers and higher frequencies and all that. So that's that was the finding of the commission, and that is certainly my personal belief. We don't know the answer. Let's explore this more thoroughly before we move forward.
Theodora, I want to hear your comments on this.
I just wanted to speak to that issue of what are our limits based on. Dr. Om Gandhi, who's a professor in Utah, who's one of our scientific advisors, was one of the engineers who helped to set the limits a long time ago and worked on studies over the time when they were being developed and the recommendations were made. And the studies that they used to determine what is safe and what is not were with small animals with short, acute, meaning short, intense exposures, where they actually had a rectal thermometer. And they looked at, if you heated the animal up, would they stop pressing a lever for food? They had rats that were trained to always press a lever when they were starving them, and then they'd press the lever and they'd get food. And the level at which they stopped, they said, this is it. This is the overheating moment. And what's the temperature of the animal? And then they did these calculations, which are antiquated calculations, to determine what did it mean for a human. What they came up with all of this math. There's actually, if you look at the standards that underlie our FCC limits, they have a list of those studies. There's some small monkeys where they heated them up, and it's awful, actually, some of the things that went on. If you think about the animals where they microwave them. What they didn't do is test, like you said, the long-term, low-level chronic exposure, which is why the NTP studies were asked for by the FDA, because they hadn't done that. And they also didn't look at a lot of other effects. And actually, in the limits, and we talk about this in our lawsuit, in the limits, they say that the big papers that go along with the IEEE and ANSI limits, they say that there are these effects, these calcium effects, and these that they couldn't figure out what it meant for health because, well, it was, 30, 40 years ago. So they didn't understand it then. And nothing's changed since, because we have these captured organizations. But that's how those numbers, became set, and they've just been, now what happens is what you described, Dr. Chamberlin, which is that it just every time they say, well, there's this study, but it's not good enough for us not to go with our thermally based limits. And every time a study comes out, they attack it. And the NTP did use intense levels comparable to the phone, in the intense level from a phone. But the Ramazzini Institute did levels far, far lower, meant to replicate cell tower exposures. And they were within FCC limits if you do a mathematical calculation. And they found effects. Yet industry says, well, those levels were too high. And then for the Ramazzini, they just attack it for not doing this and that. But there has been no adequate it's not like they looked at even animals for long term and followed what's the oxidative stress in their head, how is their memory. Let's test the memory of these animals. Let's test the babies, expose the pregnant ones, and let's look at the babies. None of that was done when the limits were set.
And if I could add, there has never been a safe level of radio frequency microwave radiation established in the scientific literature. And that's something we should all think about. There has never been a safe level. And in the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, when we talk about sun exposure or X-ray exposure, we have a principle called ALARA to get to as low as reasonably achievable. Like you would never just spend all day in front of an X-ray machine, or you would never leave your children out in the sun 24 hours a day with no protection. And so we now need to begin applying that ALARA principle as low as reasonably achievable to the non-ionizing microwave radiation that operates all of our wireless technology. Basically, plug it in and turn off the antennas when you're not absolutely needing to, in an emergency, do something on a mobile device.
So I have a question here, which is, what does the peak and average numbers mean on those meters? Why are they important? And when VCOM reports and just has one number, is that relevant, or do you need the whole picture?
Kent, do you want to take that one?
I'm not sure I do.
I can take a whack at it if you want.
Well, and let me just say something briefly, and that's something that we looked at in the commission, is that I've mentioned that there's a difference between analog radiation exposure and digital. And one of the claims is that the digital is more harmful to you because it's impulsive in nature. And you're not going to get a good sense of that from a single reading. And so average is not really adequate either, because it doesn't take into account the fact that you're getting a blast of information, pretty strong information, and then it goes quiet, a blast of other information. So it doesn't take into account the real peak. So one of our recommendations from the commission is to find a different and more realistic way of measuring the radiation exposure. So having said that, I'd like to turn it over to you to maybe explain what it means to a greater degree, but it doesn't give you really peaks. It averages over a period of time, so it's unrealistic, and that's what our concern is on the commission was.
Yeah, so if I can put it in practical terms, so when you're working with a meter like this, you want to focus on the middle number that says max, because that captures that spiked erratic pulse of radiation that is delivering signal data to you at millions and billions of cycles a second. And it is that spiked erratic pulse that is disrupting our biological cells. So the industry will spin it that, oh, but if you look at the average, look how low that is. Well, the average is not hurting us. That spiked pulse, erratic or impulsive, as Dr. Chamberlin in his PhD world calls it, but it's a pulse, it's a spike, and it's erratic, and it is really dysregulating our biological cells. Does that do it, Courtney?
Yeah, Theodora, did you want to make a comment?
I'll just comment, since we've gone down the road of talking about our limits, that there was an interagency work group by federal agencies in the United States where there were experts in the EPA, FDA, all different agencies, NIH, that came together. And when the EPA was defunded from setting federally developed safety limits, they still kept meeting for a time. And they put forward letters, which they sent to the standards committees that were setting these limits, who are industry scientists. And they said, we need to look at this issue of pulsation because it's different than analog. So, because as technology has changed, it's changed the wave. I'm not going to go into the details of the characteristics of the wave, but there's pulsation, there's a lot of other issues with it, and it's really changed. And they've never gotten a response. And those letters, actually, I need to put in the chat the EPA letter. I will put in those letters too. I found this very illuminating when I first learned about this, because I truly believed that my government would protect me from this exposure, which was everywhere. And it took me a lot of digging to kind of confirm to my own self, and this is what jumped me into this issue, like, wait, what is going on? Like, it's not like, the story is not that, the story is that the EPA was defunded and we have these antiquated limits, and those who are in the government were trying to say something. They're retired. Some of them have sadly passed away. One of them lives 3 doors down from me. And they're no longer have any role in the federal government. So we're left with this situation, in Pittsfield, where you're about to be shown these levels, which are going to be compliant with FCC limits. But just for some perspective, when the Los Angeles School District, which does not have safety, by the way, but when there was a look at this issue, they said that they're going to be putting forward a limit of 10,000 times less than FCC limits, because effects have been found thousands of times lower than that FCC number that we'll see. So 1% is like very high compared to where biological effects have been found. And the other thing is that there are a lot of different effects found at different levels with different types of waves, and it gets quite complex quickly. But suffice it to say, like Cece said, there was no federally developed safety limits, and there's a lot that companies could do to make technology safer. And they need pressure to do that, but we're sort of flying blind here.
Yeah, I think perhaps the most important message for everybody to get out to their loved ones, to their communities, to their public servants, to their medical teams, is there is no cavalry coming. I too thought, surely somebody's got our backs on this. And it wasn't until 2015 when Harvard put out that captured agency report that I went, holy moly, nobody has got our backs on this. And so our towns are inclined to want to pass the buck and point to the higher agencies, but there's no protection there. And it takes years to push this through the courts, if ever. So we have to do it at the local level by doing, Courtney, what you so bravely continue to get up and do every single day to protect yourself and your kids. You can walk away or you can stay and fight. And you have stayed and led this incredible journey in Pittsfield. So, you're my hero. Thank you for getting down into the nuts and bolts, for reaching out. And so many of the experts are here wanting to help. So folks should not be shy about trying to get your towns to listen to these presentations and to ask for help, because that's what we all want.
Thank you. And Cece, in the very beginning of this, I remember you and I meeting with our state representatives here in Massachusetts. We had Tricia Farley-Bouvier, we had Senator Adam Hines, we had Smitty Pignatelli on the line. And Smitty Pignatelli, state representative, said, we really have to educate the volunteers at the Zoning Board of Appeal, at the community development level, at the health department level, because these guys have full-time jobs, they have families, they're volunteering out of the goodness of their heart to make their municipalities a great place to live, but they often don't know anything about cell tower siting or placement. And we kept hearing like, well, we have to wait till the president or Congress makes these changes. And Smitty kept saying, we can actually make them on the municipal level, because right now, especially in Massachusetts, we have the freedom to place towers within our wireless zoning bylaws more appropriately. Now, sometimes telecom doesn't want to tell you that, and there's some misinformation around this FCC 704, but if you actually dive deeper into 704, the Telecom Act, and you dive deeper into what FCC is saying is you can't discriminate between carriers, but you can create places where no towers are allowed to be built. And we see that in Great Barrington and Stockbridge, that they've protected vulnerable areas like schools, homes, and playing fields. And we spoke to the gentleman who did this in Great Barrington, and he said it wasn't a very hard or long process at all. He didn't hire a lawyer to do it. They just looked at the areas where they needed towers and cited them what they considered to be appropriately to protect residential areas and people coming and living in houses and not wanting to have infrastructure built next to them. So it sounds like we do have the power to be able to site these towers, as Dr. Chamberlin says, safer. And that if we're looking at the maps, it's this 500 meters, which equates to this 1,650 feet, and perhaps more if you have discovered you're sensitive to wireless radiation. In closing, are there any additional things that you would like our local municipalities to know?
I would say that they're not alone and that they should be banding together. They should be banding in at the state level and bringing this information in, bringing the experts in so that we don't have to do this as one-offs in the community. Our municipalities should be doing everything within their power from where they are to not just point at the corrupted higher authorities, but to start using their voices to make the changes. And I wanted to commend your Board of Health and likely your city councilors, because they are preparing letters to go to their state legislators to say, let's do these bills in Massachusetts. Let's get a commission like they did in New Hampshire. And I'll tell you, New Hampshire got their commission in 7 months' time. We have had bills here in Massachusetts for 10 years to protect the public from the utility smart meters. My bill was Senator Karen Spilka. We wrote it in 2014. And it's now 2021, and this session goes until 2022. 8 years, what are we doing? We need to protect our communities right now. So everybody has to speak up from where they are.
Theodora, the Federation of Mayors, they've actually written a letter for making sure that municipalities have control over these placement of these small cells so they're not popping up outside people's windows. Is that correct? We're seeing our municipal leaders actually saying we'd like to have control and not put these in residential areas?
Oh, the mayors, the cities, the local communities are asking to be in control of the infrastructure.
Yeah.
And absolutely. One thing I put in the chat a few links to research and other the EPA letters, but what I just put, it pertains to what you said, Cece. So our county executive, as well as our council president, wrote a letter to our senators asking for certain things. And one of them, in terms of infrastructure, is, to have this whole issue of infrastructure, which is, of course, top of news, headline national news. But they asked that the responsibility for setting radio frequency radiation standards be transferred away from the FCC. And they asked for limits that had to do with to complete a credible review of the published papers on the health effects of radio frequency emissions on humans, including women and children, and test to measure biological impacts on humans. I wish they would have said wildlife, but anyway, I'm really excited about that. This just happened in our community. We also had, by the way, something that our county council did, was they actually did a lawsuit against the FCC, which was quite a good one. And they said, how can you force small cells and all of this 5G in front of our home, in front of the homes in our community, when you haven't even made a decision on your 1996 limits? Now, what ended up happening, and I kind of wonder if the FCC's decision was actually because of this suit, because it was really a good one. It was like, you can't force it if you haven't looked into it. But it became moot because of what the FCC did by saying, oh, we've looked at it, even though we don't believe they did. That's what our lawsuit's about. And everything's fine. However, if we are successful, which I don't know, in our lawsuit, it will open that case back up. it's an incredible case. And, you know, sometimes I wonder about, especially about the New Hampshire Commission and all the work that happened there, about a lawsuit that would be something like, you know, why haven't you looked into what the impacts are to birds, bees, and trees? Even though I know we're not talking about that right now, but that has not, we've never, no one's ever, there aren't even limits set for animals. And in our community, we have antennas. We don't, they're cell towers, but they're also these, first we have cell towers covered in what looks like a brick facade, literally on apartment buildings, which if you saw this picture, it's heartbreaking. It's such a social justice, environmental justice issue in our community. And then we have antennas on apartment buildings where there's no measuring at all. There's just so much that needs to be done on this issue. And also I'll say Environmental Health Trust is contacted on a regular basis with stories like yours, and it's heartbreaking. We have to fix this, and all hands, many hands make light work. That's where I am. Like you said, like we just all have to be working on this and engaging our elected officials who should be accountable to us.
Thank you so much, Theodora. I really appreciate those insights. And just wrapping up, Dr. Chamberlin, Cece, would you want to say anything in closing?
You've said a lot, both Cece and Theodora. Thank you for that, and thank you for your efforts. I have felt duty bound. You know, it's you're a citizen. You become aware of the dangers and posed by your cell phone radiation. You hear what industry says, and you feel a call to action. And I can see that you, Cece and Theodora, have both taken that call, and I encourage others to take that call as well. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to do my duty.
Yeah, and I will say some other folks had some questions in the chat. We won't be able to get to them all tonight, but feel free to reach out. I've given my email address at Massachusetts for Safe Technology. You can send your questions there and we'll make sure to get them. Somebody asked how they can approach their public library to get one of those meters. Reach out to me. I will send you some information on that. Others are saying, is there a template we can use to send to your local zoning and planning board or the select board? I've included in the chat the link to Americans for Responsible Technology, and they have some templates out there. I want to wish the folks in Lenox well, because in 2002, as Courtney discovered in an article, they have their senior building, which has senior citizens and some folks with disabilities. And in 2002, the town decided that that would not be an appropriate siting for cell antennas on the roof. And now they are back trying to do that again, almost 20 years later. So hats off to those of you working hard to put petitions together in Lenox. If you go to the Americans for Responsible Technologies toolkit, you may find some articles or some templates there that will help you to get that in the right hands in your town as well. And as Theodora says, please go out to the Environmental Health Trust, sign up for their newsletter, because these guys have the world's leading database of information for people to get the things in their hands to go to their towns with. So don't be shy about diving into our resources. Yes, the solution at the county level is to do hardwired technology, fiber optics, high-speed cable, which many communities already have high-speed cable right there. You don't even need fiber optics, but the industry keeps pushing it. And if you look up Reinventing Wires, the Future of Landlines and Networks, if you go to my research repository, you'll find it there. I'm sure you'll find it on Theodora's as well. But that is a good free document to give to our towns to say, here's how we fix this, and stop putting wireless infrastructure where people live. So I think one of the building biologists who's with us tonight is saying, has anybody gone into Courtney's neighborhood to talk to those neighbors to give them information to start protecting themselves? So if folks are interested in that, you may go to the Building Biology Institute. You will find building biologists there who through their very big hearts just want to help and make you guys safe. And yes, we are recording this, and we will make that link available in the coming days. And is there a cheat sheet? Oh yeah, the library just contacted me. And what do these connect to on the provider end? So if you've got this, an Ethernet cable in your router, if you're talking about your own personal devices, there are adapters you can get. You can go to wirelesseducation.org, go to our blog, and we've written a couple articles on how to hardwire your devices. And all wireless technology uses hardwired technology. It's just that last piece that hooks to you that we need to hardwire. So our towns can do this. Our homes, our loved ones can do this. We just need the information and a little hand holding, and that's what we're here to help you with. So good luck, everybody.
Thank you for helping protect our clean green reads. We never realized how blessed we were here in Berkshire County that so many of the places where I test with my safe and sound meter, people, I tested 10 houses in the last 4 months for people buying properties and wanting to make sure that they were not living where there was RF EMFs. I think I'm going to actually turn this into a career at this point in time. But we really need to protect these clean green reads. People go on these Wi-Fi detox retreats for $6,000 a week, or you could just buy a house. And people often will criticize us and say, you know, if you wanted to live not near a cell tower, you would buy a house in the country in the woods. Well, that's what we did when we came to Pittsfield, Massachusetts on Alma Street. If you look at some of our videos, we're surrounded in woods and trees and green. And we specifically chose this location to have our children and raise our family away from infrastructure because we had been living in capital cities for 10 years. And just like the Daltons, who I think I saw Paul on the call earlier, you know, I think, you know, from Manhattan and from big places, and they want to escape that. And they come here and they don't expect to have a cell tower blindside them. And then they definitely don't expect to get sick or to have headaches or dizziness or nausea. We really do have something that we need to protect. And that by simply citing cell towers safer, we can, or simply hardwiring our computers or using our technology, as Dr. Chamberlin said, it's like smoking or cars in a safer or more consensual way. You wouldn't smoke around your child. You would not keep that inside your house, just like how we make choices every day to protect our children. And so to us, it's not in my backyard issue. It's not in anybody's backyard. After you have the lived experience of being harmed by wireless radiation, you don't want anyone to have to endure the nightmare of seeing your children sick or losing your health or losing your home or having to find doctors who know how to diagnose you with injury due to non-ionizing radiation. And really the biggest solution is distance, right? It's even the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, their website say, if you're concerned about wireless radiation, move further from the source, put it on airplane mode, and don't use it as often. And with a cell tower, we have no consent. We have no power to be able to do those things. And not everybody has the financial resources to relocate. And so these cell tower setbacks protect everybody equally, which is why it's so important. This distance is so important. So thank you for the education. This is where it begins here in the communities. I'm so grateful to Theodora Scarato for joining us, Cecilia Doucette for hosting, and Dr. Chamberlin for being so available and saying, hey, listen, let's have a conversation. Let's not wait until somebody contacts me. Let's just talk, the two of us, and then inviting all these good people along to listen and learn as well. I am forever grateful for the experts who are available and who want to speak about this issue.
All right, Courtney, thank you again. Our hats off to you for not just running away, because honestly, where can we run to today? We can't. They are putting these small cells on people's rooftops right now for 5G and the Internet of Things. So if we can all just do our part, speak up in our communities, help our communities, educate and move forward towards safe technology, then we might stand a chance.
Right, well said.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you again for your time tonight. We will see if we can get this out in video format to you to share with others. And Courtney, good luck on Wednesday when your town reviews that VCOM report. We know it's going to say it's within FCC limits, but we hope we've learned enough tonight to know that we can't trust those limits because they do not protect us. And the numbers that you're going to see in that VCOM report are in the levels which we know scientifically cause very serious harm to our environment and to our people. So thank you for this opportunity. Good night, everybody. Sleep well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Discussion with
Thank
non-sub-
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Larry-
you.
Larry, if you're still on, do you have any questions you'd like answered for the media?
Hi, Cece.
Hi.
Not at this moment, but I'm certain I will
Okay.
going forward.
Well, we're so grateful you joined us and for the articles that you've done to date. And if there's anything we can do along the way to help get this information credibly to the public, we'd be honored to speak with you
I
again.
appreciate that. And can I ask Courtney, do you have a copy of the VCOM study?
I do.
Can you share that with me?
I think so. I mean, I asked for it from Director Armstrong and we didn't get a response. And Michael ended up doing a Freedom of Information Act, and that's how we obtained that information.
Yep.
So, I don't know how the health department feels about me having it prior to that meeting. I think that, knowledge is power, and we're so grateful to have a little bit of it because it doesn't need to feel like a soap opera every month, right? We're like the cliffhanger, like what's, who's going to help us and what's going to be the next step. I had a great conversation with Brad Gordon today. I thought it was going to be 10 minutes. My conversations are often longer. I think they were waiting for the VCOM report to see if we were over FCC levels. Perhaps there was a little bit of leverage that, if we were, they could use that to help support these letters to Verizon, this correspondence, and it wasn't. But we knew that because we had been monitoring all along. But we really take issue with how the VCOM report was done. People took photos of the VCOM driver who never got out of his vehicle, who held his little antenna out. And we learned through the Freedom of Information Act request that actually Dr. Kuhlberg and Director Armstrong wanted to meet with the VCOM representative here at the testing sites, but he was already back in New Jersey. He had left the neighborhood at 7:45. And the information wasn't broken out the way that Dr. Paul Haru had given instruction to do that. That would make it relevant. And even the areas that were tested, the pins that were on the map didn't really correspond with where people's houses were because of long driveways. And so I walked around with independent engineer Tim Martin yesterday, and we took readings kind of to try and track where those pins are and then at houses. And, the readings are obviously much higher and the readings fluctuate throughout the day. So I don't know if there's value in that VCOM report. I don't know if there's value in having another person do reads throughout the day or at other times. I think the most important value is that we're a health department charged with the health and well-being of protecting the health of the residents of Pittsfield. And if we know the science and that these are the levels where biological harm occurs and our readings are corresponding with that, the bottom line isn't the numbers. You can't say to people, well, hey, here's the numbers and make your symptoms go away. So I felt hopeful after talking to Brad Gordon today that, those conversations are in the works. And we've asked State Representative Tricia Farley-Bouvier to sign on to them, and starting to ask the city councilors as well. I asked Pete White what his opinion was for asking the councilors to support those talks as well. So we have a little bit of weight behind them. It's not just an injured neighborhood who's asking for this or concerned citizens, but it's actually coming from the city, and it's creating that united front that we've always talked about, that, working together to improve the health of the city and protect the health of the city and the residents, and especially the kids and the elderly up here and the people who do already have existing cancer, or people who are now finding themselves, dealing with cancer, who had previously had it and now are not in remission anymore. And I I think there is support, but it's hard because, as you heard tonight, it's a political issue. And often people are told they don't have a lot of power, but we hope by giving examples of the communities that have had these towers removed, that, you know, Verizon, Farley White will be a good neighbor and they will be mindful of the impact that they're having. And with so much open space here in Pittsfield to site them, this is really an inappropriate location. There are much better ones to place it. And I hope that these, you know, it sounds like these dialogues, you know, are continuing regardless of these VCOM results. And for that, you know, I am, and the neighbors are incredibly grateful. These conversations will continue. It will not be a, you know, not be a dead end. You know, and I was a little scared, Larry, when I read your article and Gina had said, you know, like bottom line, or like, is the tower operating within FCC standards? You know, and I wrote to them several times and was like, hey guys, like if you're a health department, let's be concerned about the health effects and, you know, not these metrics. Because the metrics really are not protective. They're based on these antiquated thermal guidelines. And there's no FCC limits for headaches or nausea or dizziness or vomiting or any of these symptoms. So, you know, going into the meetings, you kind of never know what you're going to get. It feels like there is more support and more dialogue, but I'm also really aware of the, you know, the enormity of the issue and how courageous these different municipalities, we're seeing it in York, Maine, having Dr. Kent Chamberlin speak. That's how I kind of got introduced. I had heard his name from the New Hampshire Commission report, but I was invited to give a public comment at York, Maine for this presentation for placing antennas on a water tower. And I heard him speak and I thought, wow. And, you know, Brad Gordon had referred to this New Hampshire Commission report as a roadmap for Pittsfield. And I had immediately sent his resume and his contact details to the Board of Health members and was like, do you want him to talk? Like, you know, I think he's really informative and we'll learn a lot. And I didn't get a response back. And so Ken was like, did you get a response? Did you get a response? He's like, how about we just do something? And I was so appreciative because, you know, we've been trying to work this process of like, you know, getting people to talk on the call. And I'm concerned that VCOM gets the stage on Wednesday, right? And like, I've heard enough of these spiels from telecom, right? To hear, oh, you have a microwave, so you can send to a cell tower. Or, oh, you own a cell phone. Yeah, but I don't use it 24/7, 365, you know, I mean, we use technology safely. And, you know, so I didn't want to put a lot of weight just on VCOM, but I did ask if Dr. Haru and Sheena Symington, Dr. Havis, and Dr. Carpenter had received copies of the VCOM report and if they were allowed to give comments. And I believe that they are in the process, I don't know, but that they'll also present their findings on Wednesday night to talk about, you know, the harm that's happening at these levels that, you know, VCOM is reporting. And that will be presented as well. But because the meeting's back in person, you know, I don't know how much dialogue we can actually kind of openly have and share if they're not allowed to call in.
Yep. Right. All right. Okay. Thank you for that.
All right, everybody. It's 9:03. Thank you for being with us for 2 hours tonight, and we'll see you next time. All right. Take care.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Cece, for hosting.
You're welcome, Courtney. Thanks for organizing.
Oh, so grateful to each of you for being here.
Well, we're all in this together. All right, everybody. Good night.
Good night.